Okay. You gonna agree with that too?
Yes, sir. I shall have to do it quietly.
Why?
Why start now?
Mario,
Yes.
you married that.
Yes, I know.
All right. Chapter 31. We managed to get all the way to the point of Jacob and Laban's agreement for Jacob's wages, or how he would be paid. And of course, just to refresh your memory, Jacob basically got Laban to agree that all the striped, the spotted lambs and goats of the flock would be his, and any solid colored ones would remain Laban's. And Laban immediately, before Jacob had a chance to get to him, stole every one that he had just agreed would be Jacob's and took off a 3 days journey away with the flock. So Jacob has, at this point, as we begin chapter 31, worked for another 6 years breeding sheep until we finally get down to the most recent conflict between Jacob and not just Laban, but Laban's sons. And Jacob decides it is time to get out of Dodge. So, chapter 31 says, Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what belonged to our father, he has made all this wealth. Well, clearly in 6 years' time, Laban's sons have been able to see that no matter what they and their dad cooked up, the flock were producing offspring that, according to the agreement, was going to be Jacob's. And what they saw was, there goes our inheritance, because he's getting everything here.
But they weren't doing any work.
What's that?
Was that kind of implied that they were really not doing any of the work? That it was all on?
Well, I'm sure
them?
that they were doing some of the tending of the flock, but the fact is, the flock were all producing spotted and striped offspring that they were aware of, according to the agreement, was going to be Jacob's. And why would, if each generation of the sheep and the goats are producing more offspring that, according to this agreement, are going to belong to Jacob, why is that a problem for them? Yeah, they're thinking, well, there goes our inheritance, because we're seeing him get richer and we're getting poorer. Because Laban, probably by this point, I'm not going to say he was old, but he's got at least 4 kids that we know of. We're never really told a lot about his sons, other than we're just told sons plural. So clearly there were at least 2. We know he's got 2 daughters, so that's at least 4. I mean, there could have been others, but that's the only 4 we know about. Well, at this point, since the kids were obviously adults, and he's got at least 4 kids, what does that tell us is probably Laban's age? I mean, to guess. At least maybe pushing 60, maybe a little older. So, if the average lifespan at this point is, and of course, keep in mind that we know that Abraham's line was living to be, 100, 110. But we have no indication that any of Laban's line were necessarily living that long. So we don't know what kind of health Laban was in at this particular point. He could have been 60-ish, 70-ish or so. Either way, getting old enough that the adult boys are now thinking, well, our inheritance has got to be coming sooner or later. And looks to me like our cousin Jacob is going to get all of it, because doesn't look like we're going to get or be left with much of anything. So, I mean, that would explain why their attitude toward him is kind of degrading at this point, because they're seeing him get rich and us get poor. The verse 2 says, and Jacob saw the attitude of Laban, and behold, it was not friendly toward him as formerly. Now, literally, in the original Hebrew, and of course it says he saw the attitude of Laban, it literally says he saw Laban's face. What does that tell us? Laban's probably a little mad about all this. Now notice in verse 1, it talks about Laban's sons. Then verse 2 says Jacob saw Laban. And Laban apparently is none too happy at this point.
It seems to me like Laban's sons are cut from the mold,
Of course.
because Jacob hasn't taken anything that was Laban's. He's just produced all new that's his.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that was originally Laban's, the solid sheep, are all still there. He didn't take anything.
Nope.
He's produced new.
Mm-hmm. But they see that as taking money out of their pocket.
Did the sons
And
know about
and their dad was the one who tried to cheat him in the first place. So, they don't have any room to talk here.
I'm sure they don't care either. Mario?
Did the sons know about Laban taking the sheep? which
Oh, of course.
belonged to Jacob?
Oh, absolutely, they knew. They were
the
part.
ones who probably
They were.
moved the flock.
Yeah, they were part of the
Raiding party.
Yeah, the raiding party. Because it says that Laban took them a 3 days journey away and left the ones that were behind in the care of his son. So they knew where Daddy was and why he disappeared.
So yeah, they're definitely his sons.
Oh yeah. But I just thought it was rather interesting that while it's the sons that are griping about this, verse 2 tells us that Jacob's concern is not for his two cousins. It's Uncle Laban. Because Uncle Laban's the driving force behind all of this. Verse 3 says, then the Lord, and notice how it's printed here, calling God by name, then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. Now, this is the first time that apparently Jacob has heard from God in at least or close to 20 years. So, God's still there and just reminded him, I'm keeping my end of the bargain. You do what I tell you to do and go where I tell you to go. I'll be with you. So, Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to his flock in the field. Now, first off, why do you think, even though Rachel is the younger one, why is Rachel mentioned first here?
Because he loved her.
Uh-huh. Rachel is the, yeah. Jacob considers Rachel the primary wife, even though he had to marry Leah first. But notice whose names aren't here.
Two surrogate wives.
Yeah, he's got 4 wives, but only Rachel and Leah get called out to the field. Bilhah and Zilpah are nowhere to be seen. Why not?
They really don't have the status of his two wives.
That's half of it, but the other half is basically the reason behind why they don't have any status.
They're servants.
Yeah, they're servant girls. Rachel and Leah are the daughters. And who's his gripe with?
The father
Laban.
of the daughters.
Laban.
Yeah. So he's got to convince the 2 daughters that what he's about to pull off here, they're going to support. Because Bilhah and Zilpah, they're just servant girls. They'll go where they're told to go.
Were they Israelis?
No, they were apparently Aramean.
Well, that might be part of it. They're not part of the
Well, yeah, they were part of the racial makeup of this, but were they descendants of Nahor and that particular clan? As far as we know, no. Only Rachel and Leah would have been descendants, down through Laban.
I guess there weren't Israelis at that point anyway.
Well, no, yeah, the term Israelite would not yet have even applied.
Gotcha.
All right, so he calls them out to the field. Well, then again, why is he calling them out to the field?
Where they won't be
Privacy.
overheard.
Yeah, you don't want any prying ears listening at the door of the tent to what he's about to
Been a
tell
lot of
them.
that going on in these stories.
Yeah. All right, verse 5, he said, and said to them, I see your father's attitude, that it is not friendly toward me as formerly, but the God of my father has been with me. Now, when he says the God of my father, the word he used there was Elohim. Not just the El, but Elohim, which is, the proper way to describe God. Now, why is that important? Because while he does not call God by name at this point, there's a difference between just a generic God, El, and Elohim. Elohim is his God. Now, there's an important, as we continue in this, as Jacob now relates to his two wives about his God, he's lived with them now for 20 years and had known them for 7 years before that. Well, no, excuse me. Let me back up. He's known them for 20 years and been married to them for 13. Get my numbers straight here. Do you think, has he lived with them for that length of time and has not really shared with them what God he worships? Now we know from the fact that he had been sent back here, they know who God is. They were of the family that God had revealed himself to, but I just find it rather interesting that God has not been a part of the conversation for 20 years. He's just now telling them that my God has been with me, and I need you to trust me. Verse 6 says, and you know that I've served your father with all my strength. And by the way, the word where he says, I've served your father, that word can be translated as I have worked for him, but usually the particular Hebrew word that is translated as serve, at least in my version here, there's an implication or a shade of meaning of I've slaved for him. It's not just I've worked for your father, but pretty much what he's telling his wives is I've slaved for your father for all this time. So this is not the word he's using, I guess, is not a positive description. So I've busted my keister slaving for your dad for 20 years. He says, nevertheless, in the middle of all that, verse 7 says, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. However, God did not allow him to hurt me. Again, what do we see that Jacob is doing here?
Talking about his God.
He's finally figured out that God is the one that's been taking care of him all this time. Not him, not by his own deception or anything. He's finally giving God credit for being the one that's been taking care of him. It says, God is the one providing my blessings. It's taken him 20 years to figure this out. It said, if he spoke thus, now, pay attention to what we see here in verse 8. This is important considering what Jacob has done, over this 6-year period. It says, he spoke thus, the speckled shall be your wages. Then all the flock brought forth speckled. And if he spoke thus, the striped shall be your wages. Then all the flock brought forth striped. Thus God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. Now, in the previous chapter, and keep in mind that this started 6 years prior to the events of chapter 31, what did Jacob do to breed all these speckled and spotted sheep?
Put stripes on sticks and made them look at them.
Right. Now, we have no indication anywhere in the Bible, that just isn't there, that God somehow told him to do this. This was his idea. And we also know that it was essentially and we know this from history, that was a pagan superstition. So he did that before thinking, well, I'll make this work and I'll trick Laban into, we'll breed the sheep according to what he's agreed to do. Notice from one chapter to the next what he has changed here. Before he said, well, it was because I did this. Now, what is he telling his wives happened?
God did this.
God did this. He's learned his lesson. It took him 6 years to figure this out, but he's realized it had nothing to do with any little, tricks that he pulled. It was God that organized this. So, if you wonder why did God leave Jacob here in this amount of time, or in this land for this amount of time, it was to bring him finally to this point of realization that God is the one that's in charge, which kind of tells you Jacob was apparently a little hard-headed, a little, what we might call a slow learner.
Back in verse 5, where he says, but the God of my father. While Laban and his family likely knew the one true God, they were also hedging their bets and worshiping other gods because they had household idols.
They did.
So that he was making clear that it's the God of my father is the real God that can do this.
That's exactly what he was saying.
Because they were aware of all these other supposed gods as well.
Right.
So he's singling out the God of my father here as the God who's doing this.
Right. He's
the real God.
Yeah, his wives knew who Yahweh, Jehovah God, was. But as you just mentioned, there was a good possibility that spiritual contamination from the surrounding peoples had probably by this point crept in. And as we're going to see when we get to the latter part of this chapter, when they do leave, Rachel steals Laban's idols. So Laban, even though Laban had been brought up in a family that knew the true God, Laban's hedging his bets with some idols to some other gods. But we'll get to that part of the story later on, and probably not tonight. All right, so finally, he gives God credit for all of the blessings and the flock that he's got. And verse 10 says, now it came about at the time when the flock were mating that I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the male goats which were mating were striped, speckled, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, lift up now your eyes and see that all the male goats which are mating are striped, speckled, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. Now, first off, he gives God credit. Now he's telling his wives how he's finally come to this realization. He realizes it didn't have anything to do with these, sticks that I stuck out there. He said, God came to me in a dream and God told me what was going on. So this is how he has come to this realization, is that God's come to him in a dream again. Now, as to when that happened, we don't really know. I mean, the way it reads, it would seem that maybe this just happened. But keep in mind that all of this, the breeding of this, livestock has transpired over how much time?
6 years.
6 years. So we don't know how long this was that this happened. Could have been as much as 5 or 5.5 years ago, or anywhere in between. But he makes it clear to him who he is. Verse 13, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow to me. Now rise, leave this land, and return to the land of your birth. Now notice God is pulling the strings now. He said, Jacob, you made a vow to me. Now guess what? I'm still here, and you owe me. So now get up and get out. Now it's interesting, now that he's told them this, what Rachel and Leah's response is. Verse 14 says, Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, do we still have any portion or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not reckoned by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has also entirely consumed our purchase price. What they're basically saying here is, even though they're Laban's daughters, they're basically saying, ever since we married you, our dad has treated us like outsiders, that we're no longer even treated as his daughters. And what they're saying is that they're not saying this specifically, but what they're implying is that apparently some of the work or the increase that Laban experienced as a result of Jacob's work for that 14-year period apparently was supposed to have gone to them. Because notice they say that he squandered our purchase price. They're not happy about the way that the marriage was organized. That, well, why did Rachel want to marry him to begin with? Notice I didn't say Leah.
Yeah.
But why did Rachel want to marry him to start with?
He came with treasures.
No, he came completely empty-handed, remember?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was-
Remember what happened beginning right there at the well? He had eyes for Rachel, and then they spent the next several months working in the field with each other. He and Rachel became a thing. Rachel wanted to marry him. But then, whenever he approached Laban and said, I want to marry your daughter, well, Laban said, well, guess what? That's going to cost you. Because you didn't come with a dowry, so you're going to have to work for her. And that's where the 7-year period got cooked up. Then he tricks him for it, gives him Leah instead, and said, well, you can have her for 7 more years. Either way, the point is that Rachel, and probably Leah too, were not happy about the fact that he had to work like a slave to get them. He had to literally buy them. Now, if you have to buy somebody, what does that mean that you are?
Master.
Slaves.
You're a slave. Yeah. They're unhappy with the way their father has basically reduced them from being his daughters to nothing more than slaves to be bought and sold. And that's why they even said is that even the price that we were purchased for, what did Laban do with the money? And the increase, the 14 years worth of labor that produced all of this extra flocks and things, what did Laban do with it?
He blew it.
Yeah, he squandered it. They got nothing out of it, and he squandered it. So this tells us why even after all these years, because, well, let's back up several years earlier. Who organized the deal that sent Rebekah back to Canaan with Abraham's servant?
Laban.
Laban did.
Yeah, Laban, his dad, yeah.
Well, how much did he get for her? Apparently, remember, Abraham's servant left several camels worth of riches and gold and silver. He paid a nice little dowry for her.
10 camels worth of gold.
Yeah. So have you ever wondered why then, about say 40 years later, Laban don't have that much. Yeah. You ever wondered why, for example, we see sports figures on the news that, are making, several $1 million a year, all kinds of endorsement contracts. They play football for 10 or 15 years, and what happens when they retire?
Broke.
They're broke. What do they do with it?
Yeah, lottery. Yeah.
Yeah. Or somebody that wins the lottery, wins, $3 or $4 million or even more, and a year later, they're bankrupt. Because they can't, they squander it. That's apparently Laban in a nutshell. He's taken all of this valuable, material, commodities, gold, silver, livestock, and squandered every last bit of it. And that's why you've got his boys are complaining, we have no inheritance. There's nothing gone. Well, Jacob stole it. They're basically blaming Jacob for Laban's, foolishness. Laban's mad because he's thinking, I got nothing here. Well, now even the two daughters are saying, all of what should have been ours, Daddy has squandered.
Time to get out.
Yeah, and that's what they're saying here when in the passage, verse 14. Do we still have any portion or inheritance in our Father's house? In other words, what they're basically saying is, there's nothing for us here. If we stay here, we've got nothing. Daddy stole it all, he squandered it all, and we got nothing. So they're basically telling Jacob, we agree with you, let's run. Take what we can and let's run.
Don't run too fast with a flock that big, though.
No, and especially with 12 kids. Because even at this point, we're looking at from the oldest, after about 13 years, Reuben would have only been about 12, 13 years old at this point. And then you go from there all the way down to probably, Leah's probably got a baby or two. Who's, by the way, remember who the youngest one is?
Benjamin.
No, Benjamin
Yeah,
hasn't even been born yet. Benjamin comes later. What's that?
Joseph.
Joseph is the youngest one, and of Leah's, who's the youngest of hers?
Levi,
The sister, Dinah.
Dinah, that's right.
So Dinah and Joseph are probably about the same age, but they more than likely either are babies or maybe toddlers at best. And as Lou mentioned, you don't travel too fast when you got, little kids and a lot of camels to deal with. All right. Verse 15 says, are we not reckoned by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has entirely consumed our purchase price. So they're mad about the fact that he's basically sold them as slaves. Surely all the wealth which God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, do whatever God has said to you. Now, they don't say it in so many words or less, but when they tell Jacob, whatever God has told you to do, we're on board with it. In a sense, what have they just declared?
Emancipation.
Well, more than just emancipation.
Allegiance to the Lord.
Yeah, remember what Ruth told Naomi?
Oh,
Your God,
whither
my
thou
God.
goest, I go.
Yeah, wherever you go, I'll go because your God is now my God. They have basically just told Jacob, you do what your God told you to do because we're now on board with that. They've, in a sense, just declared their allegiance to Jacob's God. They know who his God is, but we have no indication that they were active worshipers of the true God up until this point. But now they're telling Jacob, we're on board with it. We're going to go with you and we're going to worship your God. So there's 17. We'll finish up. Well, we'll go down through verse 21 and we'll call it quits there. Then Jacob arose, put his children and his wives upon camels, and he drove away all his livestock and all his property which he had gathered, his acquired livestock which we gathered in Paddan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. When Laban had gone to shear his flock, then Rachel stole the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was fleeing, so he fled with all that he had, and he arose and crossed the Euphrates River and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. Now, from where they were in and around the confines of Haran, the Euphrates River ran from southeast to northwest, about maybe 15 or 20 miles from where Haran was. So for them to cross the Euphrates River with a bunch of camels, flocks, and a bunch of kids to get across the river, that in itself was probably a couple of days' journey. So notice when they decide to flee. When Laban's busy shearing the sheep, because they knew that, yeah, of course they didn't have electric shears, so when you're shearing sheep the hard way, you're using scissors and razors and knives, so that would have been a process that might have itself taken days. So they wait until they know Laban's going to be occupied, and if he's shearing his sheep, guess who's probably with him shearing those sheep? The sons are. The sons and the servants. So probably what happened is, oh, Laban, that's okay. You go ahead and take care of this. We'll watch the sheep that are here. We'll take care of everything here on the home front. You go out to the pastures where you do the shearing. We'll take care of stuff here. Wait till he's out of sight and then grab their stuff. And notice how he describes it. He didn't lead his sheep away. Notice what it said.
He drove them.
He drove them. It's like, let's get out of here. They're running. This is not a casual, process. They are running. And I'll close with this, and then we'll pick up there on Wednesday. This is a mirror, or a setting the stage, if you will, for the Exodus. Because they've been essentially in slavery for 20 years, and when the time comes that he can run, they don't just casually leave. It's grab what you can and get out of here. They're driving the sheep and running with all they can. And of course, what happens with the Exodus? When Pharaoh finally told Moses, leave, he said, grab what you can and we will run. We're getting out of here fast. So it's a parallel for what's going to happen 400 years later. Questions this evening? All right.